I stay bout it, I'm not pouting. Break through walls and climb it mountains. If you want it, scream it loud and show this world what they've been doubting. Never waiting on the world to catch up to me. Leave it in the rear view. I wish that it was up to me. The world would never fear new.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Braintainment Show. Today I'm joined by a friend of mine and a very impactful mindset coach, someone who's worked closely with people one-on-one, now also does some really epic work upskilling other coaches, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, I'm sure. He's also someone who has their own story of transformation, which I always find super fascinating and love going down that rabbit hole. So with that said, my man, Evan Spargo, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Liam. It's an honor to be a part of this show. I've watched some of your episodes, mate, and to get the call up, very, very honored.
Awesome, mate. We've been trying to tee it up for a bit. I've really wanted to get you onto this show for a little while. I like the way you think. I like the way you move and shake in the world. I just like your energy, mate. I like your story, like I kind of touched on there. And we've got a short amount of time today, so hopefully we'll get to what we can, of course. But let's maybe start with your journey. It's pretty hard to condense our stories into a short spiel, I know. But what's maybe the highlights reel of your journey and perhaps some of the lessons learned along the way to get to where you are now?
Yeah, good question. Instead of giving like the highs, I'll give you just kind of the raw of what happened. Grew up typical Melbourne. Went to a private school. Played footy. That's how I met yourself, and it was during this time where growing up, really introverted, really shy kind of kid, half Filipino, like who the hell knows where the Philippines is? I'm the only Filipino kid in school. I grew up with an identity kind of crisis. I didn't know who I was. And I guess throughout school, I just looked at what could I do to be accepted? And so you mold, you change, I played footy. I got fit, really worked on myself and getting fit and all that kind of thing, just so I could really boost my self-esteem. And it was through these years where you try everything and you realize that, hey, it's not you. You're not living in alignment. And then that's when I started to travel overseas. When I was 21, after I finished school, I went straight into uni, did a 4-year degree at Deakin, studied in sports science and sport management. And I just said, stuff it, I'm going to go overseas for a year. So I traveled to the US with a really good mate of mine. And, it was from there that I really just thrown into the deep end of life. And I realized how much was out there. But at the same time, in that challenge, you find who you really are. And I got the taste, I got the bug for traveling. And I did all Europe, came back to Australia for a year, did a bit of work here and there. And I just wanted to go back out. I felt like there was something missing. And that's when I took a trip to the Philippines, and I met someone over there who said, you should come back here and try to forge a career here. You could be in show business, modeling, hosting, acting, blah, blah, blah. I was like, wow, lights lit up. How good is this? And within the months, I dropped everything and moved to the Philippines. And it was the best thing I've ever done in my life. And I spent 7 years there. And what it made me realize is that it made me help me accept who I am as, I am half Filipino and I'm half Australian. And this half Filipino side, which I've never really, experienced and treasured, now I do, because I've been over there and I've connected with the people. And it's like, now I fully own who I am. And it was through this journey in the 7 years that I was in the Philippines where I hit my highest highs, but also hit my lowest lows. And it was in the period where, probably at my lowest, where I hit the rock bottom. I just really down on confidence. My work wasn't going well. Couldn't be bothered training and playing sport. Couldn't get out of bed. Living paycheck to paycheck. I was hardly pay rent. Just had no direction. And that's when I met a coach, and I started working with this coach. And I went through a few seminars, through webinars, and it was through this that I started to take ownership of who I am, and realize how much baggage I was carrying from the past. And when I kind of made peace with it and forgive yourself, forgive those around you, it's kind of like I let go of all that. And that's when I experienced this tremendous freedom in my mind, myself, and that inspired me to be the coach I am today. I wanted to help others experience the freedom that I experienced, the peace that I experienced, because when you feel like that, it's like the world's your oyster. Everything opens up for you. The clarity is incredible. How you feel about yourself is just phenomenal. So that's what's inspired me now to become a coach. And ever since then, I've been studying for the last 4 or 5 years, and it brought me essentially back to Australia. I did some cool things in between. I represented the Philippines in rugby sevens and traveled Asia playing pretty cool tournaments and so things like that. But I think that's kind of some of the lessons that I learned along the way to become who I am today.
Yeah, mate, I love that. It's a lot in that. I imagine as well, to some extent, I'm just listening to that. I'm thinking, man, so many people are going to relate to that idea of this identity crisis. Like, who am I? Like, and then also learning to love and cherish. You mentioned there parts of you that maybe for whatever reason, you don't feel sort of automatically compelled to fall in love with. So I feel like a lot of people will resonate with that. Have you found that to be the case when you've worked with people, that there's sort of this identity of like, I don't know who I am, or I think I know who I am, but I don't love it. And then, that plays out in a whole slew of sinister ways, but it all comes down to this like narrative of who they are. Have you seen people just get trapped there?
100%, mate. You've hit the nail on the head there. A lot of people have their identities tied up into their work, right? They're tied up into what they do rather than who they are. And that's where there's an incongruence. And that's when there's a kind of a conflict, an inner conflict between themselves, because the perception of themselves that they believe that others have of them, they believe that's their identity. And they act in according to that. Even if they feel that they're not hitting that, that's when these self-saboteurs come in. This is when these negative emotions, when they start dealing with stress and anxiety, that kind of thing. So you feel like there's a huge identity gap from who they are to who they perceive to be. So that's one thing. And another thing is also you talked about the narrative. A lot of people are controlled by the narrative of their past, that it's allowing them to dictate the future rather than creating a completely new narrative for the future. So one thing that I work with my clients is being able to differentiate between the two and allow them to see a bigger vision, a bigger future than what the past is. Because the past is gone, it's done, you can't do anything about it. You can learn from it, but if you continually attach to it, well, then it's going to keep interrupting the future that you want to create. But if you can create a bigger future that compels you, that's passionate, that's aligned with who you truly are, that's when you really step into the true being of who you are. That's when you really step into that future and start walking towards it rather than being held back.
Man, I love that. This is some juicy stuff. And we're sort of scratching at the surface of something that like I too am just wildly passionate about. I guess what I'm hearing you say is that it is entirely plausible for someone to dramatically shift almost everything about their existence if they wish to. I feel like most people from my experience tend to get the idea that, if they're currently not good at something like a tangible skill set, they can improve it. If you're not currently a good runner, if you really try, you can ultimately get fit and all that stuff. And it's easy to see that. But when it comes to something like a little bit more abstract, in terms of like mindset and how we feel on a daily basis, and I feel people tend to lose that confidence that can be done. And just, explaining now about how people get stuck in that narrative of the past. I imagine, people sort of may have experienced for an extended period of time, maybe feelings of anxiety, really low self-worth, and it becomes all they know. So what I'm hearing you say is that it's not just like hyperbole, like it's entirely plausible for that to change too, to go from, like a default state of anxiety or fragility to actually, I feel really good about who I am. And I feel really good about my ability to show up in social situations. I feel really good about, fill in the blank. It sounds like you've found that to be the case in your own journey. And I suppose that's a probably important message for people to recognize, like, fuck, this can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it so well. What people don't realize, and I want to land this message now, is that this part of us, the past, these negative self-beliefs, that's always going to be there. right? It's something that we need to accept. That's a part of ourselves. And we call that part the shadow self. But what else is available is, the part of us that wants to shine. It's the part of us that wants to put themselves out there and love and create and be passionate and, just allow just this energy just to flow. So many people just believe, well, maybe it's just the shadow side that I am. I'm just this person. But then if you can think about it, if you can see it, if you can embody it, that other part of you is available. So that's what people to and fro from. It's like people think that the shadow side is them when it is a part of them, but it's not entirely them. If you can accept that's a part of you and then just be like, okay, great, that's always going to be there. But what's bigger than that? The bigger than that is my light side. It's the part of me that wants to shine in this world. So a lot of people come in and they operate from, oh, this is me, this is who I am, that shadow side, I'll never be like that. But the fact that you can see that means that it is available for you. And I think that's a really important lesson. What is available for you at every moment? Your best self is available for you. But at the same time, you can easily go back into those old patterns and all those ways if you wanted to. So you do have a choice, and what it comes down to is choice.
Yeah, I suppose it's really important. You kind of touched on there, not to judge that experience if it does come up. We will ultimately have both, but then the sense of agency that comes from the choice, the decision making. Okay, which way do you want to lean? And I know from my own experience, and I don't know if you've had a similar in your own journey, but there's times where I'm trying to grow into a new, whether it's a level of a level of authenticity or grow into more of a default state of calm and clarity. But then there's like the monkey mind that comes in. There's the levels of self-doubt. I think that is a very normal experience, like you alluded to. I think it is really important. I'm glad you actually went there to not, when that moment takes place, to start judging that and go, fuck, I just give up. It's, it's okay for that to be there. Sit with it. And also, what else can you explore? And that decision in that moment, I suppose that's where the power is, right?
Exactly right. I love that you brought that up. It's every moment we have a choice. What do we choose in that moment? Do we choose to listen and believe and act in the narrative that we've created in the past, or that our ego or our monkey mind has developed? Or we're going to see what else is available. What is the truth here? What is the objective truth? What's true for us? And I think one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves, and I give this to my clients a lot, is this true? Is this statement you're saying true? Is this story you're creating true? And when you challenge that, people realize that we make so many assumptions, right? An event happens, we create a story, and rather than us responding to the event, we react to the story. We react to the story that we create first. And that's when we fall into this trap and this rabbit hole of self-doubt, questioning assumptions, anxiety, and all this kind of thing. So what I try to do for myself, which is quite difficult, especially when there's emotion involved, is how can I see this as objective as possible and then act from that? But obviously what's hard, or the challenge, is the emotion that comes on, because when you're emotionally invested in something, in someone, that's when you need to allow that to dissipate before you can really make a decision and respond. If you respond while you're emotional, that's when, shit can hit the fan sometimes. So yeah.
I agree, mate. I'm smiling for a couple of reasons. One, I agree so aggressively with that idea of like coming back to what's objectively true. Everyone's going to have their own subjective experience and perception of things, but okay, what can you fall back on that's objectively true? So I agree so aggressively with that. It's insane. But then also at the same time, I'm smiling because it's like you touched on it there. Emotions also come into play. They are a variable. You have to kind of swim through that sea of emotions to see the objective truth sometimes. And that can be challenging. And I know that to be true as well. So, I guess where I want to go now, mate, is someone's listening to this, they're nodding their head going, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Where do I start with this? how do I start to recognize, but I guess what my limiting story might be? How do I start to do something about it? That process of transformation, which we now, hopefully can recognize is fundamentally doable. And that level of hopefulness that comes from that is cool. Where can people start? Is there something that's worked really well for you by way of like daily practices or anything along those lines?
Yeah, and I think the first thing and foremost, you can do it yourself. It is possible. It's firstly to listen to yourself. What I've noticed, especially as COVID's hit, people people didn't have the excuse that I'm too busy, right? They were forced to sit with themselves and listen to actually what the narrative, what the dialogue is within themselves. And I think that's the first clue for you to listen to your inner dialogue. And that can come from stillness. I know that you're an avid meditator, Liam, and if you dedicate time to sit there and listen to your own thoughts, it starts to give you an inkling of what are the stories that you're creating. And that's the first thing. It's really, what's my inner dialogue saying? What are the stories that I'm living or creating for myself? And then you'd be writing them down, writing the stories, whether it's positive, it's negative, or it's true or not true, just write them down. And then you start to see patterns. And then understand how you react to these stories. Do you react positively? Do you react negatively? Do you start feeling anxiety? Do you start feeling sad and down about it or judgmental? Once you've got the story, once you've got the emotion, then you can start challenging it. Wow, is this true? If I was going to strip away all this, does this really matter? Or objectively, what's really happening here? That's when you can start to, in the moment, as you get better, an event happens, you can pause. What's the story I'm telling myself? Great. Okay, so what's the actual truth in this situation? So, for example, someone cuts you off in the car, and your immediate reaction is judgmental. Why the hell did he do that for? When really, okay, I'm going to pause. It could be an accident. They could be rushing to hospital. They could be doing something. Who knows what's happening, right? That's just an example of us in the moment, pausing, really just allowing to see it for what it is, looking at all the scenarios rather than just the worst case scenario that affects us, that feels like we're being judged or it's against us, and responding accordingly to what objectively is happening. And that takes practice, but that's some steps that you can start doing with yourself. And as a coach, I play a role in helping others see what they can't see, because a lot of people don't have the tools. So it's so great to be able to act as a mirror for people to see what's probably unconscious to them and to be able to bring that to their conscious so they can make conscious change.
Yeah, that meditation it's been huge for me. I think what's an interesting caveat to kind of highlight as well is, for people that, because it's getting a lot of airtime now, right? The world of meditation, as it should. And there's a lot of people sort of dipping their toe in and starting to like really consider spending that time in solitude to experience the benefits that you just outlined. But obviously, one of the main hesitations that comes up is, I can't, my mind just races, or look, there's probably a whole slew of reasons why not to start. And what's interesting that I wanted to highlight is, for me personally, I found when I started trying to do that, like I'd heard all the benefits. I was like, okay, there has to be some value. Let me just try and get used to the solitude. But for me, there was two main issues. One, and I'm sure people will relate to this that are listening, I felt like my mind was crazy. Like I'm a real monkey mind. I got a big personality. I'm like here, there, and everywhere. And that's the way my mind works at times. And that was certainly the identity I had of, I'm not someone who can sit in silence because my mind's going to explode. I think too quickly and X, Y, Z. So that was one limitation. But then two, which I think is really interesting, one of the hesitations I had was I didn't want to sit in idleness and for some shit to come up and experience, past traumas or emotional baggage. It was almost like I was running from it. I wouldn't use that language at the time, but in hindsight now, on reflection, it's like, that's probably what I was doing. I didn't like the feeling of experiencing it again, but how can you get clarity around these things? How can you move through these things? How can you really, get to a place of transforming into the person you want to be if you can't go through that process? So I think that's important to point out. You're not meant to just be able to nail it immediately out the gate. Like there are going to be some roadblocks.
Yeah, exactly. And it brings up, while you were saying that, it just brings up the thought, I don't know if you read the book, but Ryan Holiday talks about the obstacle is the way. And often or not, I see a lot of people avoiding what they most need or what's most pressing for them purely because, one, the pain, two, don't know if I can deal with it. That's what I believe that's where anxiety comes from most of the time. It's the thought that if something happens, I won't be able to deal with it. And so people don't press forward, or they don't move forward because there's that apprehension. Can I actually deal with it? But on the other side of that is courage. Courage is the ability to act despite fear and having a confidence that I can deal with whatever comes up. Right?
Yeah.
So so it's really important to differentiate between the two. And it's often our fear or our obstacle or what's bugging us the most is usually the way forward.
I've certainly found that to be the case. Mate, I want to talk about integrity. I know you've spoken eloquently about this in the past and is important to you. And probably a big part of your story too. You're describing earlier about, just trialing different things to try and build, try and fit into this identity of playing football or getting fit or whatever it was. And, I've certainly, I can relate to that. I know a lot of people can. And I think with the challenge, it's nothing objectively bad about like one particular, field of interest, whether it's sport or, looking a certain way or whatever it might be. I think the challenge comes when you feel compelled to sort of show up in a certain way or in a certain situation and you don't because, the fear of ridicule, because that's not how things go down in this situation or whatever it might be. So for you, and I guess for people listening, what are some of the, I guess, your insights around being able to show up in alignment with what's important to you? Like what's that idea of integrity mean to you and how can people, apply that to their day to day?
Yeah. Great point that you brought up before. I haven't always been living in integrity. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I've made it one of my major values because, I lived my life for a period of time there, in particularly in my late teens, early to mid 20s. It was all about how do I show up to impress others? How do I show up to honor the perception that others have of me so that I can hold that reputation, so they can always like me, because if they don't, it's gonna kill me. That's where my anxiety came from. It's like, if I don't do a certain thing, well, then I'm not going to be loved. And that comes back down to, bloody self-limitations and limiting beliefs from a child is I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. So these are the patterns that I had to deal with. And then it got to a stage where I was just too tired. I was like, I can't, it's too hard not being myself anymore. It doesn't feel good. I'm over it. I'm exhausted. And I'm trying to uphold the perception and likability of others who don't really give a shit about me.
Yeah.
So why bother? And so learning that was quite confronting. And when I was able to let that go and start going, okay, one thing that I learned from one of my first coaches, and this always stuck with me, you don't owe anyone anything in this world, right? But if there's one thing that you do, it's your word. If you give your word to someone, you owe that to them, right? That's integrity for me. So ever since I heard that, I'll never make a promise if I don't think I can make it, right? I mean, shit happens, it comes up, but you work your way through it, but you make sure it happens. And for those who want to practice that, it's if you make a promise, whether it's to yourself, and I think it's the most important, is to do it to yourself first, or else you can't do it with others, is to keep that no matter what. Because then that shows that you are willing to commit not only to yourself, but to what you say to other people. And that becomes your strength. That becomes your value, right? Is your word. And people start to believe you. People start to trust you. And that's when you can really create beautiful bonds and relationships. But it starts from yourself, making a promise to yourself, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times this week. And you're like, fuck it, I'm not doing it. Well, then who else is going to believe you if you say that to them? It starts from you first. So that's where I believe integrity starts from. It's you making a promise to yourself, and then others will do the same. And I'll give you an example. So this week, I did a fast. I said to myself, I had a pretty shit weekend, to be honest. I injured my ankle, just felt crap, just put crap food in my body, just felt really shit. And on Sunday, I said to myself, I'm going to fast for 5 days. I'm not going to eat for 5 days. I'm going to drink water. That's all I'm going to do. And that's the promise I'm going to make myself. And I've done it. It was hard. Wow. It was tough. But today is the first day that I've eaten food.
What was your first meal back?
I did 5 days. First meal back is, you've got to be careful with this.
Right.
I had vegetable soup and some fruit and a bit of yogurt.
Cool.
Because you got to ease your body back into solids.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's integrity. And I do these little things so that I can make sure that I'm still in line and having integrity with myself, making sure that's still there. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight.
Mate, it really does. Yeah, that's massive. And it's super tangible. Someone's listening, they're going, okay, what do I do with all this? Dude, dudette, whoever's listening, do what you say you will do.
Yeah.
Like, that might sound simple, but if you, in my opinion, and from my experience, and similar to what you've just shared, Ed, you do that, particularly if you're someone who's pretty consistently not showing up consistent with what you say you will do to others and to yourself, you start doing that 100% of the time, it will fucking revolutionize how you feel about yourself, from my experience. And it's just not like, I am far from perfect, but I can tell you that 9 times out of 10, at least, I'll do what I say I will do, primarily to myself. And it's not necessarily because I'm amazing, because I'm a saint or a hero. But I don't know about you, Ed, but for me, the motivation comes from, I know the fucking pain internally that comes from the opposite. Wanting to live having this set of values. I want to be this way. I want to be able to show up this way. I want to do these things. I say I'm going to do it. I promise myself I'm going to do it, and then I don't. And you do that for year after year after year, you pretty quickly lose trust with yourself. And as soon as you do that, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, mate, that was emphatic. You're exactly right. I mean, if you continuously let yourself down, you stop trusting yourself, and then who's going to trust you? You know, how are you going to build strong relationships with others if that's going to be the case? And I know for you, I know you've been doing your triathlons lately, especially swimming, and swimming something was hard for you, but you persisted, you were strong, you really kept your word that I'm going to keep pushing through. And, you know, the other day, you got like 2+ kilometers in a certain time. That's brilliant, mate. You know, congratulations. And that inspires me, but also says to me that you're someone who makes promises to themselves and keeps them and honors themselves. And with this attitude, no wonder you are where you are now.
Appreciate
so it all starts from a simple promise that we make to each other, or to ourselves, that we honor and that we keep, and then we start doing it with others, and then we just start building this ball of trust that gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Becomes momentous, doesn't it? The same way that
you
know, like a certain belief system or identity can be reinforced for the wrong reasons. The same is equally true. Yes, there is like a level, there's like an activation and energy required to kind of interrupt that process, I suppose. But once you do, you know, it's it is easier to maintain than it is to start. And I think that's important for people to recognize when they're feeling the burden of trying to start something that's foreign or new. Then just know that it will get easier, and it will get more and more kind of intrinsically rewarding to continue. A couple more for you, Ev, I wanted to kind of throw at you, and something I think will be really interesting. You know, the audience that tunes into this show is pretty diverse. You know, guys, girls, extroverted, introverted. Like, there's a whole host of different people, but I want to talk to the introverts just for a moment, only because from what you've shared, you've self-confessed an introvert by nature, certainly growing up, and I feel like just conversations I've had with people that can at times be a limiting belief in terms of what it allows you to kind of do and how you show up, I suppose. And I know for you, like I said, you've kind of shared that on different platforms that I've seen. Could you maybe just talk to that a little bit and how that kind of, I guess, what the negative impact was of buying into that too much and how you're able to work through that? And I guess kind of what I'm getting at is I have my own flaws, but I fully acknowledge that whether it's nature or nurture, I don't know. But there is a level of I feel compelled to share and be open and right. There's a level of what we would shorthand to being extroverted. So I completely appreciate that, where not everyone might be wired that way. Okay. So for the people that aren't, is it still possible for them to just feel deeply confident in who they are?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. I've spent time with introverts and extroverts, and being an introvert myself, especially growing up, it was tough because there was you wanted, as an introvert, you want to be the life. You want to be out there. You want to meet people. You want to do that. But then you're just naturally reserved. You would naturally want to save your energy. You naturally are not inclined into putting yourself out there and that kind of thing. But for me, it's kind of, yes, that was me. But a lot of it was due to fear of not being accepted, fear of voicing myself out there, fear of being rejected. That's what I dealt with growing up. And I wanted to hide myself from the world because I just didn't think I was worthy enough, and that I just couldn't handle the rejection, the constant rejection. And, and that's not the case for everyone. Some people just want to keep to themselves, and that's how it is. But it doesn't mean you're not confident. It doesn't mean that you stand up for yourself when you do, when you need to, or that's something you feel strongly about, you'll stand up. And what I found was that for me, kind of what allowed me to step out of that introversion, which is still a part of me, I still naturally go back to that. But what allowed me to step out was that I have something that I'm really passionate about, that I want to voice, that I believe in, and this is me. And I know that my current way of being is not going to allow me to do that. So I need to step out of myself. And that's when I became a public speaker. I was like, I've always wanted to be a speaker, but I was always so shy. I was so low in confidence. So that's when I said, I'm going to go be a public speaker and show that my greatest fear can become one of my greatest assets. And then that's what I did. I practiced. I put myself into positions where it was incredibly uncomfortable, but then you get reps up. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And I still get nervous when I go up and speak, but it's a lot easier now. And I'm still introverted at heart, but now I have the confidence to go step up and put myself out there. But my natural tendency is to go back and, kind of relax and save my energy and recoup, and then I'll go back out in the world again. So hopefully it gives you a bit of insight of, of introverts, and doesn't mean you're not confident if you're introvert, but you're more willing just to keep to yourself because that's just who you are, and you feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, that's huge. I reckon that's the key. Reading between the lines of, you're going to have some natural tendencies, and that's okay. And just, embrace that, fall in love with it. But if you can, read between the lines and determine when and where it's really just from a place of fear, and you actually really want to show up a certain way, then that's the part to tackle, I suppose, to see you, go through that process and put yourself in those situations. I love that you said putting in the reps. Such like a tangible representation. We kind of understand it. It's like, fuck yeah, that makes sense. Like, you don't go to the gym once and expect to be jacked. Like, you put in years. Like, everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. You'd be naive. You'd be stupid to think you could just go in for one session, come out looking entirely different. It's just not how it works. I think the same is very much the true for the more abstract, or for our psychology, right? But it doesn't make it any less. Like, it's harder to digest and try to visualize, but it doesn't make it any less true, right? Like, it's the same for our mind. So look, Ev, just to finish off with, you obviously, you've worked in the coaching space for a minute now. you shared just before about the value you've got from coaches and mentors. Let's maybe just talk to that a little bit about, I guess, the value of having people in your life, virtually, in person, one-on-one, in groups. Like, how important is it to have a support system, a circle of people, a mentor throughout this journey that can kind of guide you, add little bits of information, encourage you, throw different perspectives at you? How important is that for people who are, exploring their own journeys right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll keep it really short and powerful. We can't own and we can't change what we can't see. So coaches, mentors, support groups are those who act as a mirror, allow you to see what you can't see. Things that we're oblivious to, things that we are unconscious of. Not only the negatives, but also the positives. A lot of us think a certain way, but we can't objectively see ourselves. So coaches, mentors, support, or whatever, they act as a mirror for you to see what you can't see. That's why we use a mirror, right? We stand in front of the mirror to see our blind spots, to see what we can't see in our everyday life, right? So they act as the same thing, but they're there to give you feedback, to show you what you can't see, to to challenge you, but also to lift you up. And if you didn't have that, you'd be walking around with just one view of yourself, and that view might serve you until a certain point, but you're not going to see everything, are you? There's only something. So for me, for a long time in my life, I was like, no, I'm right, I'm fine. I'll be right. Which a lot of us are, especially men.
Absolutely.
Because you think you know everything. And then once I started to put people around me, where now I've got a coach, I've got a counselor, or like a hypnotherapist, an energy healer that I work with. I've got people in my life that I talk to, friends and family. My partner's amazing. I make sure that I use them, and I do vice versa for them, because there's so much value that we get from it. Because they allow you to see what you can't see. And when you can see what you can't see, then you can own it, or you can change it.
Yeah, definitely. One final one, just out of curiosity, actually. So, well, firstly, where can people connect with you if they want to learn a bit more about the work you're doing and whatnot? I'm sure I'll throw the stuff up in the show notes, but where can we find you on the interweb?
Yeah, no worries. So just at Evan Spargo, Facebook, Instagram, and website is www.evanspargo.com. Just reach out to me there. I'd love to have a chat to you guys. Love talking all this kind of psychology, mindset, performance, self-development, growth. Love it all. So please start a chat with me, and I'd love to interact.
It's pretty clear that you do love it, mate. You've always got some really interesting insights to add. I've already got so much value myself personally from just chatting with you today. I know people tuning in will as well. Just to finish off, I'm curious, are there certain people or like authors or thought leaders, if you want to give them that label, are there certain people that you like to tune into? You like their school of thought? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So there's a couple. I think everyone, the well-known Jay Shetty, I reckon he's a modern day guru.
I'm listening to his book at the moment, actually. The Think Like a Monk. Like literally, as just before we jumped on, I had the audio book going as I was walking around the house.
It's awesome. Like, he's great because he's really about the millennials, how we feel, and how we interact with the world, how we see the world. He's one guy that I really follow, who his principles, his philosophies around mindset is very similar to mine, and his name is Peter Crone. So he's someone I follow religiously. And then the old school philosophers like Carl Jung, these kind of guys, Alan Watts. I love going back to these guys because that's where it all started, and they're still relevant now. Yeah, so I still read about them. I still listen to their philosophy. It just makes so much sense. It keeps it so simple, and if we adhere to that and we live in that rhythm of life, it's just a lot clearer. Life just becomes clearer.
Absolutely. And that's an intoxicating feeling. Mate, we could go for a very long time.
I know.
I'll wrap it up. Dude, thanks so much for carving out the time. You're a legend. We'll speak soon.
Thanks, Liam. Appreciate it, mate.